When you think of the hardest raid in Destiny, I'm sure a lot of you have your own personal experience in mind. Something that tested you, pushed you to become your very best, and asked everything of you. It could have been your first raid ever, or participating in a day one whilst underleveled. You could be 14 and think it's deep to say the next one is the hardest or something like that too, but some of you guys who are new to the channel, new to Destiny, or just don't participate in raids at all would be justified in believing that a raid with the sheer size of Last Wish or King's Fall would be the hardest raid ever made. But today, I'd like to tell you that the raid, backed up by statistics, general player opinion, and a unique day one experience, is actually one of the shorter raids in Destiny. So short, in fact, you would call it a raid layer. So without further ado, let's talk about this raid, or more specifically raid layer number 2, Spire of Stars, the hardest raid ever made. Just a quick reminder for everybody, my code for G-Subs has been extended worldwide, free shipping, any tub over $30. If you guys would like to try it and you live outside of the US, give it a shot, man. Code Evan. We're so close to 150,000 subs on YouTube, and I think we can get it before November 10th. So if you aren't subscribed, I'm calling you to action. You can always unsub later. Some footage in this video is from players around the community. Their links will be in the description of this video, as well as the music too. Now, the follow-up Warmind DLC looked to explore more about the story of Rasputin, the AI Warmind who had been around Destiny since the beginning in 2014, but had never been given the spotlight in Destiny's story. So we got what you'd expect from a Destiny DLC story. No real stakes, an antagonist which, oh shit, it's the Alaskan bullworm, and a tiny bit of fan service by the way of Mars returning. So what was the content? Well, this time it was 3 story missions, 3 strikes, 2 crucible maps, 4 adventures, the escalation protocol public event, and a banger of a secret mission, Whisper the Worm, and finally the raid layer, back on the Leviathan. Sounds like a lot for a DLC, but if you think about it, this was actually less content than Curse of Osiris, which had significantly more story missions. However, Warmind was more impactful than Curse of Osiris for a number of reasons. Yes, there were less story missions, but it's Destiny story missions, so there's not a lot going on in actual storytelling through gameplay, just cutscenes and dialogue. There were some much needed changes in Warmind, such as leveling requiring you to participate in the end game for max level, a very difficult escalation protocol boss requiring a full 9 crew lobby sweating to kill the boss for a 3% chance at one of 3 rotating weapons, and a weekly piece of exclusive armor, which actually looked really good. One thing I disliked with both Warmind and Curse of Osiris is overlapping strikes into story missions. This would become a staple in the future content of Destiny, and I don't like reusing content at all. I couldn't tell you one reason why, I just don't like it, and that's the take that I'm sticking with. The story was fairly simple. Anna Bray, a guardian who was thought to be lost, seeks for a connection to her heritage with Braytech. Her search leads her to the polar caps of Mars, and as a Golden Age warsat begins to crash into the ice and the glaciers begin to thaw, the main core of Rasputin is revealed, as well as an ancient hive army bent on its destruction, yada yada yada. You get the point. The hive are here. There's Zol, worm god. Oh my god, Zol. We help Anna discover her past and destroy Zol before it's too late, and that's basically it, right? So shoot ogre, sauce Nokris, sauce Zol. Yeah, you get the point. The question then becomes, why the hell are we back on the Leviathan? Well, I guess Callus needed the squad to roll back up on the Red Legion assassin named Val Ca'uor and take back the Leviathan. Now, I'm gonna be honest, it doesn't really connect at all, but Callus is our boy, sort of, and he needs us to pull this off, so let's do it. All right, it's time, everyone. No more stalling. Behold, Spire of Stars.
And here we go.
guys ready to frag out? Let's get it, boys.
So question, if it starts at 370, what's it gonna
Might
end at?
scale.
It's May 11th of 2018. Welcome to day 1 of Spire of Stars, 3 days after the release of Warmind on May 8th of that same year. Your typical teams were racing here again, including some of the LFG team members, although they had split ways since some of their members had left Destiny. The Goliaths were here as well, like Math Class, Tier 1, Redeem, Rare Drop, Legend himself, etc. They were racing as usual. This race made for some seriously insane stories, like disconnects at key moments, communication struggles, final stand disasters, and more. I want to stress again that raids on day 1 versus over time have different levels of difficulty, but Spire of Stars may be the hardest raid ever made due to the fact that it maintained difficulty from day 1 onward. This raid asked players on day 1 to at least be 15 light levels under, and there were no Forsaken supers like Well of Radiance to nullify damage taken. Keep in mind, Whisper was not yet in the game either, and double primaries with no random rolls were still there. Plus, teams didn't have Ikelos Sniper or Shotgun yet, since they were extremely rare to drop. Remember, 3% from the hardest public event activity. Spire doesn't start in the traditional Leviathan entrance like the previous 2 raids, and instead begins in a new part of the Leviathan. The first encounter is already a step up in quality compared to Eater of Worlds, the Statue Garden.
Yep, greed.
And stop taking them once you
Yep.
Yeah, once you throw it, stop, yeah.
It starts.
Right, it's starting.
Keep doing it.
It is throwable.
Hey, there we go.
All right, yeah, so get the greed and throw it in the bucket.
There we go.
Nice. Throw it in the middle. That's okay.
I was like, we just got that mechanic.
Oh, spat out another one.
The Statue Garden should be an encounter that I dislike. I don't know if it's the aesthetics or the fact that I'm never a plate holder, but I actually like this encounter over other plate encounters. The encounter was simple. Grab a ball and a mist to get the greed buff. Throw balls to each person standing on plates 1 through 4. When the shield in the middle lowers, toss a greeted ball in there. The goal here was to communicate which player needed a ball, because if a plate lowers too far, you're screwed. The other 2 players not raising a plate were meant to kill ads and help pass balls around. If you picked up the mist without a ball, you had the debuff engulfed, which would kill you after a certain amount of time if you didn't receive a ball. If you had a ball with no mist, it was useless as mechanics would not work without greed. Greed was given by having both mist and ball, with the catch being at ×10 greed, you die. Later on, if you knew how to super cancel, you could just ignore the ×10 completely, but I guess we won't really talk about that. Now, after 3 rounds of doing this and just waiting, you were done. That was basically it. One really cool hint about this encounter was that the Callus statues sort of told you what to do like the Leviathan, with them pointing plate to plate. After 3 waves, just collect all your loot and jump into the underbelly of the Leviathan.
Throw it.
Throw it at the thing. Throw it up mid. Throw it up mid. Glad you got it. Throw it up
Yep.
mid. Throw.
It's done. It's done.
Stay on the plate.
Try and stay alive, guys.
Major middle. Major
Objective
middle.
complete. We got it.
Let's go. Let's go. Let's go.
Despawning. Let's go.
It's probably opening soon. Once the Colossi are dead.
It's open. Should I throw it in?
Yeah, throw it.
Throw it in.
Who's next?
I'm next.
Ben's next.
All right. Rick, you got it? Oh, no, I got it.
There
I think we're
it
done.
is.
No,
Objective complete.
Yeah, that's it.
Entrance.
Oh!
Go,
First encounter done. Hell yeah.
I like that encounter a lot.
Now into the Power Conduit.
Hey, oh, wow.
Oh, hello.
Hey, I think this is the correct way.
Alright,
So we have to.
Oh.
Yeah, there's an arrow on the ground showing like a direction here. You can drop down here.
Split 3 and
There's
3.
one down on the ground. Drop
One
down.
down.
Everyone come down here. This arrow shows you the way on the ground.
Oh.
What? Okay,
Nope.
never mind.
I did.
The Power Conduit is actually a really fun piece of downtime for a raid layer, and it's not really what I would expect from a raid layer considering they're shorter than normal raids, but this one had some charm to it. Once again, grab a ball and a mist. You're not required to throw balls into the checkpoint rooms to get an extra chest at the end, but each room did require 3 players to get to the next section in order to reach the end, and on day 1 this encounter wasn't really difficult to platform through, since nobody was trying to throw the balls. However, anyone trying to get the chest at the end knows how buggy the balls were to count as a dunk, but more on the bugs a little bit later. Once through, just troll some new players and tell them to punch these explosives on the tube and shoot to the top of the Leviathan.
There we go. Nice. There we
Oh
go.
my God.
Oh.
Okay, we're going into Spire now. Now we're going to
Scary
Spire.
as shit.
I got stuck in, dude.
Over here.
You can blow it up.
Oh, we should destroy the locks, I think.
Yep.
Makes sense.
Okay.
How
here
the
we
fuck
go.
Good job, Gunny.
die?
It explodes.
The locks.
Oh!
Okay.
Give me the big suck! Why
The
do I
big
always die in these things?
Now, the Celestial Observatory.
Joining.
Yeah, it's opening.
Nice. Oh, Val
Val Ca'uor.
wait. Oh no, run,
Alright, so
run.
this is a-
He just
oh,
went
he
up.
bounced.
Yeah, he just.
Big if true.
Oh my.
Oh.
Oh shit.
Oh, he's.
Oh, he just killed a
robot
Callus robot.
with
And
his
then
And
off.
he has a jetpack.
back. It.
Alright.
On day 1, the first teams were at the observatory in little over 30 minutes, and this encounter would take another 30 plus minutes to complete. The first thing you'd notice as you walk in was this Red Legion badass smacking up our boy Callusbot and then whooshing away. The next thing you'd notice was 4 plates around the room. You knew immediately that those had to be involved because Destiny devs and plate mechanics go hand in hand. I'll keep this encounter brief. This was all about a buff called Superior Retainer, which meant you could fly up in an orange tube. Superior Retainer was given randomly to 2 players, and this allowed them to go up the tube, which was built by the rest of the team holding down the 4 large plates. Once in the, well, I guess I'll call this the overhead projector room, you could briefly see one of 3 symbols: circle, square, and triangle. This callout coordinated everyone to stand on smaller plates, and once doing so, this would open the 3 gates built into the central platform. One player had to throw a greeted ball into the correct door to arm a weapon. Then, have everyone return to big plates and give one superior player the ball to throw at the projector's ship. This would cause the Leviathan to attack one of the Red Legion ships in the background. And I gotta say, it's still so cool to watch a ship get wrecked by a massive laser in the background. Do this 3 times and that's the encounter. Now, the hardships of this encounter came down to communication, speed, and ads. Communication because relaying between all members which side needed charge, who had superior retainer, and who needed to swap with who could be difficult. Speed because if you were slow, the game would wipe you. And finally, ads because Evan put so many goddamn ads on these YouTube videos. So that was the final encounter, right?
A lot of big boys.
Yeah, there's a Colossus that's gonna, I think, me up here in a second.
All right,
right.
get on your plates quick, please. All right, going up.
There you go, bro. Lock it up.
Boom!
Ship
We
destroyed.
may not be done yet. Keep fighting.
Yeah. No, we're not done. Not done until there's a chest.
Add
They
these
despawn.
spawn.
As despawned. Hey!
It's not, I don't think it's over.
There we
Chest in the
go.
back.
I don't think it's over.
Chest in the back.
Called yet. There's another
Chest in
encounter.
the back.
I got the Colossus. I got the Colossus.
Wait as long as you can to throw it. Try to get like a 7 or an 8.
More ads. More ads.
Got it.
Ship destroyed.
Ship destroy.
Let's go.
Get off place, get off place.
Let's go.
Same mechanic probably for the boss. Something like that.
Stack up on heavy. Stack up on heavy. Grab ammo.
Ooh. Give me my schloot. Alright, go to the top.
Well, you know the answer. I'll just save you the trouble. Oh my god, that's not it! No way, dude! The next encounter just needed you to stand on the Callus plate, and Val Ca'uor came down.
Oh!
Okay, you just want to just like,
White, white,
Yeah.
not worth.
Alright, well this one shoots fire.
This is the boss. This is 100% boss.
Yeah.
What's our objective?
Callus, we're about to get back up.
He's in the middle. What's up, Callus? Yeah, we're not done yet. New objective.
Thank you, Tullus.
No, move out of the center, move out of the center.
Oh my God! Why would you do it? Why?
Oh yeah, so
Dynamic entry!
he's 380 by the way,
I'm
so
just
I'm
gonna
gonna be doing
die
big
real quick,
damage.
dude. He's 380.
He's
Dude.
Everything I said was correct.
This is easily one of the, if not the most challenging raid encounter I've ever done in this game on day one. Most of us were about 10 to 15 power levels below most of the enemies in the final boss area. I was not ready for how long this was going to end up taking, and unfortunately my main group, well, we didn't even end up finishing our run. I got another group together solely to get a video up of the kill for you guys. Only 11 groups have beat this, with 5 of the 6 people in my group having been in the top 10. My clan, math class, had another group going that managed to get 5th place, and I am super, super proud of them because this place is not a game.
You know how I said this was the hardest raid ever made? Well, the raid up to this point was like an hour, right? This is the final encounter, and the world's first was over 6 hours long. So I think it's safe to assume Val was pretty damn difficult and great of a boss fight. A boss that fought with all his might. A boss that didn't hold back. A boss that felt alive. Val may not have been the biggest bad guy in the world, but my god did this dude step up Destiny raid bosses. Quick explanation. This encounter is actually fast paced as well, and everything happens in an organized sequence. Part 1, kill ads. Part 2, get pooped on by Val shooting a ball to everyone who is engulfed, pass it around the room to everyone and throw it at him. Part 3, mess with your teammates and tell them to stand on big plates.
Going up. Hold on, plate, hold plate, hold plate, hold plate.
Yeah, dude, you
I'm not even kidding. You just baited me real hard.
No, don't actually stand on big plates. Wait, then kill gladiators. Do the same thing as the previous encounter, but this time with 2 ships, 2 balls, and therefore 2 gates with armed weapons. After this, grab a ball and mist it and pass it between 3 players, then a second ball for the next 2 players, then the third for the last player. Finally, Callus takes control of the bot and raises it up and gives you a time limit to throw balls at its hand, breaking Val's shield, and this gives you a short window for damage.
Okay, I'm hiding. Yeah, rocket's gone. No, what?
It's fine.
We're good, we're good. That's a quarter, that's a quarter.
On day 1, all of this at once definitely stumped players, and even Error from Redeem told me, quote, "This was one of the only boss encounters in any raid that you can't just hide from it most of the time. You are forced to be exposed multiple times for each mechanic." With being underleveled on day 1, this proved to be the hardest for most teams. Being in the open quite often, then the coordination on top of that with each mechanic, who was going up, who was grabbing what ball, who was passing, etc. We got to damage pretty early once reaching the boss, since most of the mechanics were just more of what you did in the previous encounter, but once you got to damage, that damn boss shot nukes at you. It was already hard enough to stay alive during the mechanics to unlock the damage phase, but the damage phase itself was even more punishing. Guided rockets from the boss, more ads during the fight itself. There was nowhere that was safe, or at least we thought for hours. Now guys, I just want you to remember, there was no Well of Radiance to nullify a lot of the challenge. There was the double primary meta, and Whisper of the Worm was not released until a month later. The same struggles that Redeem's Error told me can be said for Tier 1 in math class, who were both neck and neck with Redeem on this one. Teams were so stumped due to having to be out in the open, the damage phase itself was getting lit up by the ads and the boss, so the whole room was actually used here. Those small side rooms are where DPS had to happen since Val's missiles were nukes on day 1. Math Class and Tier 1 had a lead on Redeem since they both made it to damage faster, but one thing stood in every team's way on day 1, and we'll get to that in a little bit, trust me. Redeem had some seriously bad luck here too, with multiple disconnect problems. Indica had a Wi-Fi maintenance in his area which knocked him out momentarily on their best run.
Me as well.
Let's go.
Go, let's go.
Mel.
Oh, melt point's not on. No.
It's fine. Doesn't matter. We have that shit on him.
It's fine.
Let's go. We got it. Come on. I got a barricade in here. Right here.
Barricade's out.
And Flesh Crunch straight up disconnected from the raid.
R2. Gonna be R2.
Flush. I'll flush DC'd again. Flush DC'd again.
Dude, I say get Eon. No more. Like that's just gonna continue to happen.
So the team had to bring in a substitute named Eon Styles. Here was the other challenge with Eon though. Eon barely understood and spoke English at the time, so they had to hope and pray he could pick up on the mechanics. Thankfully for them, Eon understood where he needed to fit in and stepped up to the plate. Now for that part that I said I was gonna get to. Final stand.
I got a barricade in here. Right here.
Barricade's out.
Remember, final stand.
Yeah.
Everyone go down here. I'm getting disconnected.
Yeah, that's fine. Got him.
Okay, final stand. Grab balls. Go charge it.
Throw, man. Throw,
Yeah, go. Throw him.
One more.
Go get it in the back.
Get it. Split.
No.
Shoot at him.
No.
Shoot at him.
Yeah, shoot.
No! I didn't know.
Throw it at him.
Yeah, 20 seconds. Oh my god, this bomb ain't disappeared. No!
Throw it at him.
Keep throwing bombs. Yo, whoever has the res needs to get sneaky. Get sneaky now.
We have no res.
You have 30 seconds.
Get him. Throw it. Shoot him. No!
Okay, question. How many bombs did it take to pop it?
6.
6?
We all have to be alive.
Hit him.
Come on, boys. Come on. I got it.
Final stand.
Ton of rockets.
Grab the balls.
Grab the walls, all of them, grab all of them.
I don't know. Just kill me.
Shoot him.
Throw the balls at him.
Hit him. One to the back.
One more.
Oh, that was literally one short, though. It's stuck in the fucking mesh. Fuck.
No way.
Val Ca'uor had a final stand unlike any other raid boss in Destiny up to that point, and he had a ton of health on this phase. You weren't given a ton of time to take it down, and you needed to grab a ball and throw one at him or you were dead. Math Class died here multiple times because he still had so much health and they didn't have a ton of ammo left for damage. Tier 1 had a very similar story with this one as well, with the final stand being the final story of their boss fight. Redeem died here too on their best run due to Indica's disconnect, but on the very next run, it was time to make some history.
Alright, get ready for balls. Alright, go.
Ready for balls? Grab the...
Balls and then rockets.
I don't have any.
Shoot him.
Throw it. I got this. I want to shoot.
Shoot him.
Shoot.
I got the ball. I got it.
Throw the ball in the back. Go ahead. Throw the ball. Now. Let's go.
We did it! Let's go!
We got him.
GG, boys.
GG, boys. GG.
Holy ball clutch!
Sweatsicle with the final ball save, Eon Styles with the clutch play, and Redeem taking home another world's first. This one without any community controversy. No Tfue playing on somebody else's account. No Wardcliff Coil. This one was officially a world's first in 6 hours and 34 minutes, with Val taking up 5 of those hours. Seriously, this boss fight was the prerequisite to Last Wish in terms of leveling affecting the difficulty. But unlike Last Wish, this raid would stay permanently difficult to the average raider since it required all 6 players to participate, be aware, and work quickly on the encounters. Nowadays, this raid is still the lowest cleared of all of them, and I think for good reason. It actually asks every player to step up, and the boss is alive and kicking compared to its compatriots. Man, I love this shit. That was the day one experience. But what about prestige mode? Well, not a lot again. The same modifiers as Eater of Worlds, more health, harder enemies, etc. This one would be cleared by Emissary, Novik, Bala, Soto Solstice, Ether Panda, and Alex in 31 minutes and 8 seconds. But something I found crazy is how close this was, with the second place team only 41 seconds behind them. The loot in this raid was also like Eater of Worlds in the fact that it wasn't great. Gear looked that's a fit. The weapons were the fusion rifle, Emperor's Envy, and the sidearm Last of the Legion. So yeah, not that great. But we did get the sleeper catalyst in here, and we got the best emote in the game. You know what? Loot's 10 out of 10. So that's basically it for Spire of Stars, but I wanted to give some final thoughts on this one. I believe this raid is the most difficult raid Destiny has ever had because it asked every player to take up responsibility and act fast on that responsibility. This raid is statistically the lowest cleared raid and was the first time a boss fight came down to being absolutely cracked in every field, not just on figuring out mechanics first. This gives it that leg up in difficulty, I think. I'd also like to hold up that this one is the hardest since its difficulty came out of left field. I mean, Argos was done in the time it took to get to the boss fight in Spire. Val took 5 whole hours to clear. That's almost as long as Riven on day 1. But like I said, this to the average player is the hardest because we know you can just cheese Riven, and man, I'm still mad we can skip the Riven fight. Okay, I'm cool now. I also think this raid is impressive because the mechanics don't drag on too long in my opinion. Outside of the first encounter, you're moving around the room and fighting in the open unlike most other plate encounter fights. Like, you guys know I hate plate encounter fights. So when Spire of Stars, a raid that relies heavily on plate mechanics, is fun to me, you should hop on Destiny 2 and try it for yourself. If I had to give this raid some negative feedback, it would be that the loot is absolutely abysmal. I mean, there is almost nothing here loot-wise, and I think that takes away from it, maybe to the point where the low clear rates can be attributed to the fact that there is no loot in this raid. The other thing that I said I was going to talk about much earlier on in the video, and I apologize for it taking this long, is that the bugs in this raid are very, very bad and have never been fixed. If you don't know what I'm talking about, it's the fact that the ball mechanic does not work half the time. Sometimes text doesn't pop up, and more importantly than anything, you just die sometimes out of nowhere for not going fast enough, and sometimes you die for going too fast. So it's like the game needs you to go a certain speed in order to beat the encounter, and I think that's a very frustrating process, and I wish these bugs got ironed out. I think with the right loot, and the right amount of bug fixes, this could be widely considered a fantastic raid, but for now, it's one of those picks where some people love it, some people hate it, and I'm more in the boat of loving it, even though there's plate mechanics all over the place. I think it's kind of funny that Wardcliff Coil is so effective against this boss, and I don't exactly know the reason why, other than the coils all hitting Val Ca'uor and it being pretty dang consistent, but yeah, Wardcliff kind of shreds this boss. I know not everyone will agree with me, but that's okay. So tell me what you think of this raid in the comments or on Twitch at EvanF1997. To end it all, that is Spire of Stars, in my opinion, the hardest raid ever made. And if you enjoyed this video, a like would be greatly appreciated, as well as a subscription. Remember, twitch.tv/EvanF1997, come talk to me while we play a bunch of games. I've been playing Phasmophobia a lot with some friends, and it's an absolute blast. You can check out all my socials too, and join my Discord, man. We chat all the time in it, and anyways, thank you guys so much for the love, and on to 150,000 subs on YouTube. Enjoy the bloopers, everybody.
Where was Char? Yeah, Char was right there, Triple, so you're right there.
You and Tina are gonna pass the walk whenever. I'm just gonna die immediately.
Let's.
You're R1. Beaver, get R1.
Yep, I will replace R1.
All dogs go to heaven.
I'm gonna go up. Alright. And get on plates.
Oh my god, dude. I'm gonna need help with my gladiator probably. He's just running straight at me.
Alright. I'll help him. I got this.
Whoa! My...